When a reclusive millionaire hears his late wife's untouched piano being played in the dead of night, he discovers a forgotten melody and a new reason to live. William Ellington stood in the grand foyer of his estate, surrounded by opulence that no longer brought him joy. At 68, his distinguished silver hair and impeccable posture were the last vestiges of a man who once commanded boardrooms with confidence. Now, he wandered through the cavernous halls of his home like a ghost, the echo of his leather shoes against marble, the only sound in the suffocating silence. "Another day in paradise," he muttered to himself, the words hanging heavy in the air. Paradise. What a cruel joke that word had become. The Ellington estate, with its crystal chandeliers and priceless artwork, had transformed from a home into a mausoleum of memories. His gaze drifted to the family portraits lining the hallway. Generations of Ellington stared back at him, their painted eyes judging the last of their line. William had no children, no heir to the fortune he had amassed across decades of ruthless business dealings. At the end of the corridor hung a photograph that still caused his breath to catch. Catherine, his wife of 30 years, her smile radiant even through the glass. "5 years today, Catherine," he whispered. "Still can't bring myself to play." Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. William's hand brushed against the velvet cloth covering the grand piano in the main sitting room. Catherine had been a gifted pianist, filling their home with Chopin and Debussy. Since her passing, the piano remained untouched, another artifact in his museum of grief. The music had died with her. Zora Jackson clutched her small suitcase as she approached the imposing gates of the Ellington estate. At 26, with determination in her eyes and calluses on her hands, she had worked her way through college, taking any job she could find. Now, with her mother's medical bills mounting and her younger brother's tuition due, this position as a live-in housekeeper for the reclusive William Ellington was a godsend. "Remember what Grandma always said," she whispered to herself. "Step light, but stand your ground." The estate manager, Mrs. Winters, greeted Zora with a critical eye, examining her from head to toe with the scrutiny of someone inspecting produce at a market. Mrs. Winters was a severe woman in her 50s, with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into permanent disapproval. "Mr. Ellington values his privacy above all else," Mrs. Winters explained as she led Zora through a maze of corridors. "You will maintain the East Wing, including the library and guest suites. Mr. Ellington rarely enters these spaces, so your paths should seldom cross. You are not to enter the West Wing under any circumstances. That includes Mr. Ellington's study, bedroom, and private sitting room." Zora nodded, absorbing the information while taking in the grandeur around her. She had never seen such wealth up close. Marble floors polished to mirror-like perfection, artwork that belonged in museums, furniture that whispered of bygone eras. "And that," Mrs. Winters said, gesturing toward a cloth-covered object in a room they passed, "is not to be touched, ever." Even beneath the cloth, Zora recognized the distinctive shape of a grand piano. Something in Mrs. Winters' tone suggested there was a story there, but Zora knew better than to ask questions on her first day. 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine. Zora quickly settled into the rhythm of the mansion, rising before dawn to begin her tasks and retiring to her modest quarters after dinner. She rarely caught glimpses of Mr. Ellington, who seemed to materialize like a specter before disappearing again into the forbidden West Wing. On this particular night, sleep eluded Zora. Her mother's voice on the phone earlier had been weak, the cancer treatments taking their toll. With her mind racing, Zora found herself wandering the empty corridors of the East Wing, seeking solace in movement. Her footsteps led her to the sitting room with the covered piano. In the silvery moonlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, The instrument seemed to call to her. Zora had grown up playing on an old upright at her church, her grandmother teaching her hymns and spirituals. Later, a kind music teacher at school had recognized her talent, giving her lessons after hours. "Just a peek," she whispered, carefully lifting the velvet cloth. The moonlight revealed a magnificent Steinway concert grand, its black lacquer surface gleaming like a still lake at midnight. Zora glanced over her shoulder, heart pounding. Mrs. Winter's warning echoed in her mind, but her fingers tingled with longing. She hadn't played in months, too busy working to make time for music. Just one song, she promised the empty room, sliding onto the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before descending gently. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room, tentative at first, then growing in confidence. Zora closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, a balm to her worried soul. Her grandmother had always said music was prayer without words, and in this moment, Zora was praying with all her heart, for her mother's health, for her brother's future, for her own path forward. William Ellington couldn't sleep. The anniversary of Catherine's death always left him restless, memories haunting him like persistent ghosts. He sat in his study, nursing a glass of scotch, when the first notes reached his ears. At first, he thought he was imagining it, Catherine playing in the next room as she often did during their life together. But as the familiar melody continued, reality crashed down upon him. Someone was playing his wife's piano. Rage propelled him from his chair. No one touched Catherine's piano. No one. He stormed through the corridors, the music growing louder with each step. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Catherine's favorite piece. William burst into the sitting room, ready to unleash his fury, but the words died in his throat. There, bathed in moonlight, sat the new maid, her eyes closed in rapture as her fingers danced across the keys with a skill that stole his breath away. Her expression was one of pure communion with the music, transporting William back decades to when he'd first seen Catherine play, wearing that same look of transcendence. He stood frozen in the doorway, unable to interrupt the performance that had cast a spell over the room. The anger drained from him, replaced by something he couldn't name, a mixture of grief and wonder, of past and present colliding. The final notes of the sonata lingered in the air like a question. Only then did Zora sense she wasn't alone. Her eyes flew open to find William Ellington standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Mr. Ellington!" Zora jumped to her feet, nearly knocking over the bench. "I'm so sorry. No, I shouldn't have. Mrs. Winters said—" "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was steady, betraying none of the emotional storm within. Zora's hands twisted in the fabric of her nightgown. "My grandmother taught me when I was little. Then I had a teacher in high school who let me practice on the school piano after hours. You've had formal training?" William stepped further into the room. "Some, sir. I earned a partial music scholarship to college, but couldn't afford the rest without working full-time." Zora straightened her shoulders, preparing for dismissal. "I understand if you want me to leave. I had no right to touch your piano without permission." William moved closer, studying her face. "That was my wife's piano. No one has played it since she died 5 years ago." Zora's heart sank. "I'm truly sorry for disturbing something so personal, sir." William was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Zora to the piano and back again. "My wife believed music was meant to be shared, not silenced." His voice softened with unexpected vulnerability. She would have hated seeing her piano gathering dust beneath that cloth. The following evening, after completing her duties, Zora was surprised to receive a summons to Mr. Ellington's study, the Forbidden West Wing. She knocked tentatively, heart-pounding. "Enter," called the now familiar voice. William Ellington sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, a folder open before him. "Miss Jackson," he began without preamble, "I've taken the liberty of looking into your background." Zora swallowed hard. "Sir, your academic transcripts are impressive. Nearly perfect. GPA while working multiple jobs. Partial music scholarship to Juilliard, which you declined in favor of a state university offering more financial aid. Degree in music education, graduated with honors." He looked up from the papers. "And yet, you're working as a housekeeper." "My mother has cancer," Zora explained, her voice steady despite her nerves. "The medical bills, and my brother's just started college. This job offered housing and better pay than teaching positions in the area." William nodded slowly. "I also discovered that before coming here, you were teaching piano to underprivileged children at the community center downtown for free, despite your own financial struggles." Zora's cheeks warmed. "Music saved me during some dark times. I wanted to pass that gift along." My wife felt the same way. William closed the folder. "Catherine was a concert pianist before we married. She gave it up to support my career, but she never stopped playing. She also taught children, established a foundation to provide music education in low-income schools." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The foundation has floundered since her death. I've maintained the funding, but without her passion driving it." He turned to face Zora. "I have a proposition for you." "I want to offer you a new position," William said. "Director of the Catherine Ellington Music Foundation, with a salary commensurate with your qualifications and responsibilities." Zora stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Ellington, I don't understand. When I heard you playing last night, it was as if Catherine was sending me a message." His voice roughened with emotion. "For 5 years, I've been drowning in grief, letting her legacy gather dust like that piano. You reminded me that music doesn't die with the musician." Zora found herself speechless, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. "The position would cover your mother's medical expenses through the Foundation's healthcare fund, which Catherine established for the faculty. There's also a scholarship program that could benefit your brother." William returned to his desk, pulling out a contract. "This is not charity, Miss Jackson. This is recognition of your talent and determination." "Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Zora asked, still processing the magnitude of what he was offering. "Because in just one night you brought music back into this house." William smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features. "Besides, Catherine always said talent finds a way. You found your way to her piano, against all odds." 1 year later, the Ellington estate hummed with life and music. The sitting room, once a shrine to grief, had been transformed into a vibrant teaching space. Large windows that had remained curtained for years now stood open, allowing sunlight to stream across the gleaming Steinway and illuminate the faces of eager young musicians. The walls, once adorned only with somber family portraits, now showcased colorful artwork created by the students who filled these rooms with their energy and promise. Where silence had reigned, the mansion now resonated with scales and arpeggios, occasionally off-key renditions of simple tunes, and most frequently the sound of uninhibited laughter. Spring had arrived in full force, painting the estate grounds with bursts of color that seemed to reflect the transformation within. The gardens, meticulously maintained but previously only for show, now featured winding paths where children chased each other between lessons and families gathered for picnic recitals when weather permitted. The iron gates that had once symbolized exclusion and isolation remained perpetually open during daylight hours, an invitation to the community that Catherine had loved and that Zora now served with unwavering dedication. The Catherine Ellington Music Foundation had more than doubled, its reach under Zora's leadership expanding from 6 schools to 15 across the city. The foundation now offered not only piano lessons but a full spectrum of musical education: string instruments, woodwinds, percussion, and voice. What had been a modest memorial project had blossomed into a comprehensive program that served over 300 children, most from neighborhoods where arts funding had been slashed from public school budgets. Each child received weekly instruction, access to instruments through a lending program, and participation in quarterly recitals that had become community celebrations. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the estate buzzed with anticipation. 37 students ranging in age from 6 to 18 were preparing for the spring showcase, their most ambitious production yet. Parents arrived early, carrying potluck dishes and flowers, contributing to the atmosphere of festive collaboration that had become the hallmark of these events. The formal dining room, previously used only for William's solitary meals or rare business dinners, had been repurposed as a reception area, its massive table now covered with homemade cookies, fruit platters, and punch bowls. William emerged from the kitchen, carefully balancing a tray of refreshments. At 69, he moved with renewed purpose, his posture still impeccable, but without the rigidity that grief had imposed. The severe, bespoke suits had gradually given way to cashmere sweaters and well-tailored slacks, still elegant but approachable. The most remarkable transformation, however, was evident in his eyes. The distant, haunted look had been replaced by a keen awareness of his surroundings and genuine engagement with the people who now filled his home. "Mr. William, did you make those lemon squares?" called out Tamika, a precocious violinist of 11, who had appointed herself unofficial taste tester for all recital refreshments. William smiled, a genuine expression that had become increasingly common. "Indeed I did, Miss Tamika. I followed your suggestion and added extra zest this time." "Awesome. Can I have one now? For quality control?" The girl's eyes sparkled mischievously behind purple-framed glasses. "After your performance," William replied, with mock sternness, though he winked as he set down the tray just beyond her reach. "Artists must perform before they feast. Isn't that what Ms. Jackson always says?" Tamika sighed dramatically but nodded, returning to her violin case to prepare for the upcoming recital. William watched her with quiet affection before making his way through the crowded room, greeting parents and offering words of encouragement to nervous young performers. No longer the isolated figure haunting empty corridors, he had become Mr. William to the students who visited the estate 3 times weekly for lessons and weekend workshops. Many of the parents, initially intimidated by both his wealth and his reputation as a recluse, now engaged him in easy conversation about their children's progress and community matters. In the corner of the room, Zora sat at a small desk, making last-minute adjustments to the program. At 27, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. Her natural talent for music had been matched by an unexpected gift for administration and leadership. Under her guidance, the foundation had secured additional funding from local businesses, established partnerships with the city's professional symphony, and created a scholarship program that had already sent 3 graduates to prestigious music schools. William approached her desk, taking care not to disturb her concentration. "How are we doing on time? The Matthews family just arrived, and they're typically 15 minutes late to everything." Zora looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're actually running ahead of schedule for once. Marcus asked if he could practice one more. Time before the audience arrives, so I sent him to the library. That piano needs tuning, but it's quiet in there." "How's our next prodigy doing?" William asked, his voice softening with concern. "I noticed he was struggling with the Chopin piece yesterday." "Marcus reminds me of myself at that age," Zora replied, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "Determined but frustrated. He'll get it. His fingers are still growing into those octave stretches, but his interpretation is remarkably mature. I told him to focus on the emotion rather than technical perfection today." William nodded appreciatively. Zora's approach to teaching balanced discipline with compassion in a way that consistently brought out the best in her students. He had watched her calm performance anxiety, inspire discouraged beginners, and challenge advanced students with seemingly intuitive understanding of what each child needed. "Your mother called while you were working with the string quartet," William mentioned, taking a seat beside her desk. "She sounded wonderful, full of energy. She mentioned something about a surprise she's bringing to the recital." Zora smiled broadly at the mention of her mother. Rebecca Jackson had defied medical odds, responding to treatment with remarkable resilience. The comprehensive health care provided through the foundation had given her access to experimental therapies unavailable through her previous insurance. Now, in remission for 6 months, she had become a beloved volunteer for the program, often accompanying younger students and sharing her rich knowledge of gospel music traditions. "She's bringing the choir from her church to perform with our advanced piano students for the finale," Zora explained. "They've been secretly rehearsing Amazing Grace with a jazz arrangement I wrote. 20 voices with our 3 piano accompanists. It's going to be powerful." William's expression softened further. "Catherine would have loved this," he said quietly. Zora reached across the desk to briefly touch his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago but now felt natural. "I think she orchestrated it," she said softly. "Of all the houses in the city where I could have found work, I ended up here, at a piano that hadn't been played in years." "Sometimes I feel her presence during the recitals," William admitted, his voice low enough that only Zora could hear. "Especially when the music fills every corner of this house. The other day, I found myself standing in exactly the spot where I stood the night I heard you playing Moonlight Sonata. I realized I was waiting, not with anger this time, but with anticipation, for someone to bring music into the silence." Zora nodded, understanding the significance of this confession. William rarely spoke of such feelings, even now. "She built the foundation for all of this, literally and figuratively. We're just continuing what she started." From the hallway came the sound of Marcus practicing the troublesome passage of his Chopin piece, finally mastering the delicate run that had frustrated him for weeks. Both William and Zora paused to listen, exchanging smiles of satisfaction. "I should check on the string section," Zora said, gathering her papers. "Angela was having trouble with her cello positioning, and I promised to help before the performance. And I should rescue my lemon squares from Tamika's quality control," William replied with a chuckle. As they moved in separate directions through the crowded room, William paused to observe the scene around him. The mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum now pulsed with purpose. Staff members who had previously tiptoed around his grief now moved confidently through the space, directing traffic and assisting with preparations. Mrs. Winters, initially resistant to the changes, had become an enthusiastic coordinator for the Foundation's events, her organizational skills perfectly suited to the logistical challenges of running a music program. Near the grand staircase, William noticed his brother-in-law Thomas, Catherine's younger brother, deep in conversation with Zora's brother James. The two men had formed an unexpected friendship through the Foundation, with Thomas mentoring James through his business degree, while James introduced Thomas to contemporary music that had revitalized his own compositions. These connections, organic, meaningful, across boundaries of age and background, were perhaps the most profound legacy of the past year's transformation. William made his way to the window, watching as more families arrived for the recital. A year ago, his world had been confined to the empty rooms of his estate and the sterile boardrooms of his company. Now, his calendar was filled with recitals, workshops, foundation meetings, and dinners with an expanding circle of people who had become something like family. Through the window, he caught sight of Zora in the garden, demonstrating proper posture, to a young cellist. The sunlight illuminated her face as she laughed at something the child said, her joy uncontained and contagious. William felt a surge of gratitude so intense it momentarily overwhelmed him. When he had heard her playing that night, when the millionaire heard the maid playing the piano and froze, it wasn't just because of the rules being broken or the memories being stirred. It was because sometimes the music is exactly what the soul needs to remember its purpose. Inside, the once silent mansion resonated with possibility. Children practiced scales where important men had once discussed mergers and acquisitions. Families shared meals in rooms where William had dined alone for 5 years. Music flowed through corridors that had echoed only with footsteps. The grand piano, no longer shrouded in grief, gleamed in anticipation of the afternoon's performances. As the guests began taking their seats and the young musicians gathered for final instructions, William knew with certainty that this was not merely a foundation bearing Catherine's name. It was the embodiment of her spirit. In saving the maid who played the piano that night, he had inadvertently saved himself, discovering that even the deepest grief could give way to new purpose when the right notes were played. Outside, beneath a blue sky, the gates of the Ellington estate stood permanently open, not just to admit students and their families, but to welcome in a future where wealth meant opportunity shared and music belonged to everyone with the heart to hear it.